open. But we had a Senate hearing yesterday, folks, that everybody wanted to hear, and all these things were revealed about this possible agreement between the PIF and the PGA Tour. So I know I've seen some of the stuff, and you've watched the whole hearing in depth.
If I may answer, Senator, my attitude was all of the people other than the guy with the money we shouldn't talk to. We should just get to the spiritual leader. And because everything that was happening didn't make any sense to me. So I didn't want to waste any time talking to anybody. And my advice to the commissioner was don't waste any time talking to anybody other than the guy with the money.
And who's that guy with the money in your mind?
The governor, Yasser Al-Rahman.
Okay. On April 14th, 2023, Mr. Devlin emailed you, and the final line in his email states, "I fear the Saudis will double down on their investment and golf will be split asunder in perpetuity."
Yeah, thank you, Senator. They didn't have to double down to create the problem that we already had. So if they just kept doing what they were doing, it would be significant enough, because the PGA Tour it's not that big in terms of players. So if they take 5 players a year, in 5 years, they can gut us.
Again, the PGA was facing existential threat because of the PIF and because of LIV. So you're responding to that existential threat. So now you've agreed to reach out to Yasser Al-Rahman. What did you make of the man? I mean, tell us a little bit, what was his motivation? I mean, I realize you can't necessarily get inside his head, but can you just kind of describe for us why were the Saudis doing this? Or why was Yasser doing this?
Well, thank you, Senator. Obviously, I'm not inside his head, but my perception, and as I said, I told the commissioner that you should send someone only to speak to him. And in April, he chose me to reach out to him. I went out to meet him, and unlike everyone else that is involved with LIV, where they're very acrimonious towards the PGA Tour, he said he respected the tour, respected how they did things, and I was surprised by that. He didn't have the attitude that, frankly, a lot of the management people had, and so I thought it might make sense to put the man with the money and our commissioner together for another meeting.
Talk about that real quick.
Dude, it was must-see TV. So I'm sitting up in my room, and I'm like, dude, I really want to prep and do a big podcast about this, throw some clips in about the hearing. So we are going to post that to everybody, some clips of kind of the key points to the meeting, because, not everybody has the time to do a 2.5 hour, hearing, listen to that. But it was very interesting. So pop it on in my room, and then I'm just super intrigued, man. It was like comical. It was informative. It had like parts that were, interesting in terms of figuring out the PGA's situation and how they came to it. That's just my general, like, kind of overall feel of it. And then the fun, like, non-golf person. Well, my wife loves golf, because she's around it all the time and me watching it every damn minute. But she gets in, and Senator Hawley's on from Missouri, and when he's grilling them about China, she's like, "What the hell are you watching?"
Saudis. Let's talk about some of the money that you've taken from communist China. Speaking of sports washing, what can you tell me, Mr. Price, about the PGA Tour China Series?
The PGA, thank you, Senator. The PGA Tour China Series was last operated in 2019. We have not operated it since then, and have no plans to continue that series.
You don't have a PGA Tour in China at all right now?
We do not.
What about the PGA China Tour? Let's look at the quote here from Mr. Greg Gilligan. PGA Tour China is truly thrilled to be partnering with Shanghai Sports on the PGA Tour Series China. Shanghai is a world-class organization with great experience of connecting the expectations of international sports bodies with an understanding of the Chinese market. This isn't happening?
I'm not sure, Senator, what the date on that quote is, but we have not conducted the PGA Tour China Series since 2019.
But you just signed a 20-year agreement to conduct a tour series in China, correct?
It has not been conducted since.
I'm like, it's the PGA Tour Senate hearing. She's like, this dude, what the hell is he talking about? And what was bad was Senator Hawley comes out with his first round. He did better the second round because, I mean, his arguments were legitimate. You know, if we're talking about, you know, he's basically, if we're all nervous about the Saudi influence and all that, he kind of was like, well, what about your all's business deals with China? His poor assistant behind him, I was like, I don't know what was up with that guy. I was like, he's like,
Well,
probably like, I'm getting fired.
well,
Told my senator.
the comedy for me was when I saw Rex Hoggard tweet. He sent out a tweet talking about the meeting between Jimmy Dunn and Al Ramayan, and you know there was, I guess, WhatsApp messages. Well, apparently he has him as "Yes Sir Golf" in his phone.
Yes, sir. It's even funnier.
He said apparently the text message in the chain said YESSIR. Yes, sir.
From the PGA Tour side, to be honest, I do think they came off pretty damn well in terms of like their explanation of the secrecy and why they did what they did. To be honest, in terms of what they were trying to accomplish from that initial meeting of abolishing it really sounds like they were in a really rock and a hard place in terms of, like we talked about, with the lawsuits and the amount of money, you know, that Price was talking about. He's like, we're just like going up against an unlimited fund. So
Right.
what are you going to do? You know, it's like, are you going to fold and then eventually all these dudes are going to go over to Live? Or are you going to do something about it?
Well,
So
I think some of that was what Liv was hope. Their hope was, hey,
right.
we can bury them, and then we're going to be the global entity. I think they probably realized that wasn't good for the game of golf. I think, first of all, I think Ron Price and Jimmy Dunn were probably the best two people to be in front of the Senate committee. Now, I'm sure that I don't know if Yasser or Matt Monahan. I know Monahan comes back next week. If they will get an opportunity, or if they want an opportunity,
Right.
I understand the secrecy to the whole thing. And it sounds like this goes all the way back to like December of last year, where these there was chatter of stuff, and then people said, no, not right now. But I really do feel for the players. And I think we're starting to hear stuff come out about the players, and it's supposed to be a player controlled organization, but they don't feel like they're being told anything. And I think, and they're a lot of behind closed door messages, and things aren't getting out there. And so you're hearing guys talk this week at the Scottish Open. I'm sure this has been some scuttlebutt for a while with a lot of them, but I feel like they could have been a little bit more upfront. I don't know how. It sounds like there's been a ton of communication versus email, but I do understand the secrecy to it to an extent, because if you're trying to, I'm not saying bury Live, but try to keep them two separate for the time being, but work to bring them together, you need to keep it kind of under wraps as far as possible. And I think that they did a pretty good job at that, obviously, because we were all blown away. Even the guys, I mean, we found out when the guys on tour found out.
Right.
And if Greg Norman didn't know about it, you knew it was secret.
Right.
And now there's, you know, the chatter of that PJ Tour wants Norman ousted, and Norman makes it sound, apparently came out today and said he's not going anywhere, and nobody's been told him anything, that Liv's going strong, and there's more tournaments next year. And I feel like Liv is going to have tournaments next year. If they can come to an agreement, I think Liv will have tournaments of some sort, but it's going to be controlled under the PGA Tour umbrella, or this NUCO, whatever they're going to call it. And I feel like you're going to have other guys you'll have guys playing these tournaments but they might not be the same 48 guys.
Right.
You know, there's going to be teams, you know. I think the rumor of Tiger and Rory having a team, I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, I still don't see them participating in it, though. I mean, they were so firmly against it. I feel like that's a little lip service.
Well,
I mean, we'll see it when we see it, but
do you think Tiger's going to play 10 events at all?
No,
there's
no chance. Like, I can't see him being bound to anything. You know, Tiger's kind of he kind of like does his own thing, you know, in terms of his schedule. He always has, and he's had to do his own thing even more with his injuries of late. But I don't see him getting required to play 10 events, even if they're 3 rounds, and they would suit him a lot better. They were so opposed to it, and even Rory said he hates Liv too. And you know, I would really be surprised if that happens. I mean, sure, maybe if this deal goes through, and you know, we go through another Liv season, and they see how it shakes out, and then say it gains some popularity, sure, maybe they kind of come across and they're like, okay, we could get some equity in one of these teams and this would blow up, and we'd actually have some financial gain from that. So you know how it goes. I mean, the money kind of changes folks' perception, but with them two, they got offered some of the most money of all of them, and they were firm about really being against, Live. But who knows? I think the thought from the PGA Tour's perspective is they know that they can't stand Greg, those two, and if they can get Greg out of there, maybe that changes their perception of Live a little bit. They may not still like the model as much, but I think if Greg Norman was out of there, and I think that maybe that's PGA Tour's motivation. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's probably one of their biggest motivations. Like they can't have Greg Norman as part of this because I feel like they just butt heads, and Norman would want a seat at the table, and they're not going to allow it. And
Right.
I think a lot of guys on tour don't really want to have anything to do with Greg Norman. I think there are some guys that are okay with him on Live, but I would bet there's some guys on Live that really don't want to have anything to do with him either. They're just
Right.
I think there's guys that probably deep down want this to happen because they feel like you can have this global group be one big entity and play in different formats or different countries or different kind of events that grows the game of golf. I just think that I don't know. They got to come to an agreement. That's what we're hoping for. The last thing I want is to go into 2024 with nothing, because then
Right.
I feel like it's just going to drag on longer and longer. But you got a $600 billion organization, the PIF, who truly can I think they will work hard. I think there's probably more going on than being let on out there. The one guy who I really liked to hear throughout this, and he's asked questions from time to time, and he's an elder statesman out there. Haven't pulled that one out in a while.
There he
Is Adam Scott. Adam Scott, I'm sure he probably wasn't happy with this whole thing, but it sounds like he's kind of on board for what's going on to an extent. But I think I think all the guys just want to be kept in the loop. That's the bottom line.
Well, then I think the problem with keeping him in the loop, and I think that Jimmy Dunn kind of made a great. I think both of them had a pretty solid performance. I was actually kind of skeptical of how well they would do in terms of all the hard questions and things. And to be honest, the kind of secrecy of a negotiation like that, in terms of just like a framework agreement, it sounds like, I'm not a business expert. I'm in the freaking medical field, so I'm not CNBC here, but it sounds like those type of business deals are a little shaky. It's kind of just like a foundation for what a deal could be apart. Let's lay down some ground rules so we can kind of come to a deal hopefully at some point. And they throw a little bit of some stipulation. So I don't fault them for being like, it makes sense when they explained that. I know Senator Blumenthal was really worried about them being kind of silenced in terms of saying things about the Saudi government and things like that during this framework agreement. And that, I guess, was in that. But it does make sense when he explained that when you're making a negotiation like that, are you going to be trashing the other party that you're going to make the agreement with? It doesn't really make sense. Like, that's just going to sour taste from your other perspective, whether you agree with their government or how they operate or the things that they've had in the past with their human rights that people have problems with, which is legitimate. It doesn't really make sense to go into an agreement like that, at least the first foundations, spouting out about the other country, or about the people that you're going to do business with, no matter who they are, no matter how. I mean, there's a lot of companies that do business with shitty people. I mean, there's a lot of ties to, and that's why Senator Hawley, even though I laughed it because he was kind of sounded silly, and then he was confused about the PGA Tour China thing. I think he thought it was still really like active, but it sounds like they're not really planning to continue it. He did make a good point, though. It's like, there's other kind of countries or other things that we do business with, that it's not just Saudi Arabia, so it does, to me, make sense that they were kind of up against a wall. They had one decision to make, or two decisions, and Price said it kind of perfect. It was like, you don't do anything, you get litigated for years, you have